Hi, everyone. This is Jason Yakinchuk. I'm the chapter president of ISACA Greater Washington, D.C. Welcome to our third cyber workshop webinar where we're covering continuity of operations for the home by James Kelly. We're excited to offer this online learning, and we've been doing a series of these events and continuing over the next couple weeks as well while we're all kind of stuck at home in isolation as we kind of battle out this COVID situation and return to our normal operations and in-person events. So hopefully we'll have only a short disruption, but in the meantime, we're working to continue to offer CPE events online and to continue our education as frequently as possible so that our members can interact virtually here with these webinars and so forth and get timely education. I wanted to thank our partners before we get started here. So we have a number of organizations that we're working with actively to bring forward these talks through speakers and engagement. So thank you to everyone on this slide here for all your support and help. And also a thank you to the sponsors of our organization. Without their generosity and support, both from an engagement standpoint, without that, we would not be able to do as much as we can for our members. So we really appreciate the continued support and value add that the sponsors bring to our organization. So I'd like to introduce today's presenter. So James Kelly is a ICS professional. He's also the vice president of the NOVA student group, which is affiliated with our chapter. So he does a lot of work within the university as well. So that right there is a big accomplishment, and the give back to the community is really important to help build a pipeline of leaders and really engage students to give them an opportunity to build their careers and get off on the right footing. So James is a cybersecurity student at Nova College. Outside of school, he works on industrial control systems maintenance, chemical automation, and coordinates daily safety operations. He manages staff and develops the standard operating procedures for emergency response teams. As the NOVA ISACA student group vice president, he leads technical learning for sessions for the student group members on topics such as firewalls, IDS, IPS, VPN, and debugging software. James is an aquarium enthusiast and enjoys long hikes. He can be reached at the email listed on the screen. And before we get started, if you have any questions, Babur is going to be monitoring the chat, so you can post them there and we'll make sure that James gets a chance to answer them either throughout the presentation or at the end. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation and thank you for attending today. The recording will be posted on our website within the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. And then you can also access the previous presentations on the website as well. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Once again, my name is James. I will be doing continuity of operations for the home. Go ahead, next slide. Here's just my bio again. If you have any questions about it, just let me know at the end. All right, so today on my agenda, I'm going to define what is COOP. Continuity of operations plan. Why is COOP important? Ways to implement it at your household. My final thoughts, and finally a Q&A. All right, so today I want to start this presentation by just a quote by Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So make sure you're applying this and never be that one person who says, oh, this is never going to happen to me. That's never a good mindset to have. Always expect failure, be humble to notice, and fix these problems before a catastrophe affects your business or household. You can't control natural disasters or pandemics. My overall objective for you guys is I want you guys to learn survivability, not just involving IT, but learn to apply it anywhere. Next slide. So, COOP planning. To the right of that, this is just an example of a free image I found on Google. Your household plan may not include all these steps, so keep that in mind. But the significance of having a circular plan is what I want to go over. Your plans must encompass any possible events that may occur. So if that's a natural disaster, pandemic, things that are beyond your control. Okay, so what is a continuity of operations plan? Let's just start off with the basic definition. So it's a detailed plan that is responsible for a proactive response in a catastrophe event or other emergency situations. So let me just emphasize proactive. It's defined as acting in advance to deal with a expected difficulty. So you don't want to be responsive on an event, you want to be proactive, because that's the whole point of having a plan in mind. So it's extremely important to ask these questions. So what critical things do we need to do? So if that's involving a business, like how can we stay open? Who will do these certain things? It's important to include everybody so they have an essential role. How will they be done? So you need to question that. How can these operations continue with a natural disaster? What resources are needed? Do you need to ask for help? Do you need aid money? Where will we be doing these things? Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Where will we be doing these things? You got to keep in mind that if your primary location of where you're trying to hold operations, if it's your house or a business, what do you do if that's just suddenly not there? When will we need to resume them? So you got to have a priority guideline. How will we return to normal, or what if we can't? So worst case scenario, you may not even have a business or a plan anymore. Next slide. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to use the 5 W's. So who, what, where, when, why, and how. So for who has to make sure you include essential personnel. So essential personnel are necessary for carrying out their identified role or service. You got to make sure that there is a primary person and a backup, and they both need to be aware and trained to these roles. Communication is essential. You need to make sure that these personnel have an emergency calling tree or all the contact information of all the employees. So if they don't know what to do, they know somebody who can call. And you got to remember, a chain is as strong as the weakest link. And those weakest links can be your employees, it could be your staff, it could be yourself. So what are essential functions? Essential functions must be continued and prioritized of how quickly they need to be resumed. So what I mean by that is, if your essential function of the business is to provide a service, you need to make sure you outline what exactly does the service need to function. Where? A recovery location. It's always important to have an alternative operating facility or a backup location. A backup location could be your house, it could be another facility, or it could be a virtual environment. When? So when, you got to have a detailed priority and phase list. So line by line goal of what needs to continue or where we need to focus on rebuilding. How? Vital resources and documents such as software and financial documents and stuff, those are necessary in order to carry out essential functions. So it's important to make sure your hardware, your machinery, all that is working and you have a plan to keep that. Can you resume operations? You may need to reconstitute. Nothing can be perfect. You got to learn how to adapt. Know when you have to pull the plug on a business or restructure it. You have to adjust your services to fit in present day technology. Next slide, please. So why is continuity of operations so important? On the surface, you need to maintain the essential operations. So essential operations, they generate revenue. If you're not maintaining them, you're losing revenue. That is a problem. You cannot lose revenue and keep the business open or any other service. It's important to adapt and address these current issues in society. So for example, the current COVID situation, teleworking, delivery services, virtual services, those are all going to take over society for the time being. And that will keep, and it's important that these operations keep the leadership strong. If you have a lack of leadership, people are not going to be confident in your solutions, and they're not going to believe in your service or your product. Second layer, plan for a real chaotic disaster. Disasters are not only an opportunity to learn, but it's crunch time to get things working. You got to do what's best for every unique situation. You never want to wait for a catastrophe to test your plan. It's so important to practice, learn from mistakes, practice again, adjust your plan, and practice again. On top of that, while you're doing this, it's important to keep your staff or anybody in the loop of the communication. So daily updates, weekly updates, protecting vital assets and resources. So redundancy is key. That's a huge thing, especially in IT. You got to make sure you can recover from a natural disaster. A vital asset may also include somebody's life. So you can't take it like a game. Like, life is serious. You need to have criteria and a plan to figure out difficult situations. Achieve a timely recovery. So a restoration time frame. This is super important because you need to make it realistic. You can't just be, okay, day one, we're going to recover the entire business. You need to break everything into essential functions, essential personnel, and you need to pick what needs to stay in order to keep the process going. Go ahead, next slide. This is just some statistics. I just want to highlight how important the recovery time objective is. Companies that are not able to resume operations in 10 days of a disaster, they're not likely to continue their normal, they can't continue providing their normal services. So I think of it as a super critical time. All plans must work or be modified within this window of time. And that is your best chance of being able to resume normal operations. So according to the Institute and Home Safety, if your business does not match that 10-day operation window, 80% of the time, the companies do not recover. And so on, so on. Next slide, please. So now that you guys have a understanding of what a continuity of operations plan is and why it's important, let's learn some ways you can implement it at home. All right, so unpredictable events. You have a lot of potential scenarios that can happen. Fires, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, internet outages, power outages, no running water, store closures. All of these events are just what life throws at you. I like to think of life always throws curveballs. Don't let these events ruin what you have worked so hard to build, especially your home. You put in so much work at your home, your family. You need to constantly maintain the highest possible level of alertness to achieve a proactive response. So some simple questions that you can ask yourself and evaluate is, what risks lie in our area? What is the best line of defense against each of these risks? How will I provide the basic needs for my family? Am I prepared for the emotional stress? It's always important to have a backup plan, so make sure you know how to plan around it. Going back to the basic needs, what are you going to do if the store closes? Where are you going to get your supplies? It's these questions that make you go back and modify your plan so it can encompass the disaster for whatever you're trying to solve. Food, water, and shelter. Those are the three primary things that humans need to survive. It's also important that everybody in the household is on the same page. If that includes your spouse, your elders, or any children around the house. Make a plan, know your role, and practice the drills. Next slide, please. All right, so in a general planning, if this general plan is a fire escape, tornado, etc., any sort of these unpredictable circumstances, the three most important factors that must be considered while developing a plan is the internal and external risks of your home. There's always going to be the outside and the inside. So it's important to identify what can go wrong on the inside and make sure that communication is established. People know how to deal with certain things. So if everybody in the house gets sick, it's not an external risk, it's more of internal. You also need to have the assets of your home categorized. So what I mean by that is if you have a lot of valuable documents, it's important to make sure that they're in a fireproof safe. Same goes for what are the most valuable assets for survival? Non-perishable food. That is huge. You need to make sure that you have that in your plan. Goes to my next point, proactive gathering of survival gear. At the end of the day, if you don't have what you need, then you're not going to do so well. And you also got to realize that people may be in that situation where they don't have the survival gear, so they're going to try to take it from you. So you need to have a plan for when things do not go your way. And you have to remember that most of the time, plans never go smoothly. You have to learn to act in real time, adjust them, fix any sort of mistakes you have or any sort of gray area, overcome any of those circumstances, and remember that you need to prepare for the worst. Next slide, please. All right, so broad example, communication. So communication in a household is huge, especially if you run any sort of commerce out of your house. If you're trying to keep up with current events, that's what's happening around the world. It's important to be able to access the internet. So one huge factor is internet bandwidth. So it's super important to know what you're trying to do. So if you buy a 20 megabytes up and download line and you're trying to stream or download a whole bunch of files, that's not going to work. So understand the limitations behind bandwidth. Always ensure you have a reliable router. A lot of internet service providers, they provide you with a router that it has factory settings for them. All of that is spyware. It's not good to have. So if it's possible, always upgrade your router and make sure that you for the purpose of what you need, that router has to have it. So if you need 5 gigahertz fast wireless connections, then buy a router that has that compatibility. Default passwords. So a lot of devices, it's pretty surprising. You read the manual and there's never a step where it's change the default password. And in this day and age with the internet, you can find all of these default passwords for basically every device. And 99% of the time, home users think that they can just plug in a device and then it's good to go. But you need to make sure that the default passwords for all your devices are changed. Admin password is not acceptable. Updated devices to include, it's important to make sure devices maintain the most recent security updates. This includes the router and all IoT devices. And also be aware of the limitation here. Not all family members are an IT specialist, so it's important to be able to explain simple rules and policies for the home. So for example, an antivirus protection. Every device connected to your wireless network should have an antivirus. It will protect you from any sort of threats. and it's more of just like a cushion of comfort. If the antivirus fails, you need to have or antivirus or any of your like routing or your internet stops working, you got to have a backup communication plan. So an extra external landline is really good, because being able to continue communication is the key to having the most relevant plans. And it also gives you a good heads up. And the newest thing for our society is cloud utilization. Basically, everything uses it. You sign on to Gmail, all your stuff is in the cloud, super convenient. But on top of that, you need to realize that cloud utilization, it cannot contain it can't contain personal or PII. You want to try to limit all of your credentials and all that sorts of stuff on a local connection that is physically accessible by you. You don't need to put everything in the cloud that has your private information. All right. Next slide.
Hey, James, I'm just going to stop for a second to remind our audience. So if you have any questions, please start typing on the chat box, and I will do my best to read it so James can answer in about 5 minutes.
Yep, thank you. All right, so my final thoughts. When I was making this, it's really important to understand think what's going on in the world now. You can't avoid everything. The news, it's everywhere. People, hysteria, all that's going on. It really made me realize that I need to work on my plans at home, because my parents are getting to the age where I basically have to help them a lot, and it's understandable. They did it when I was a child, so I came to the realization that I need to implement a plan for a potential quarantine of one of my family members. That's the worst case scenario. It's pretty high likelihood and it's terrifying, but you got to remember, you got to prepare for the worst. I'm going to be blunt. Expect that somebody close to you is probably going to pass away from this current pandemic. Understanding how to prepare yourself emotionally is extremely hard, because you got to realize the world isn't always filled with happiness. Everything happens for a reason, but being prepared can really help with this. And I can go on all day. So many what if scenarios. What if? Oh, what if a tree falls on my house? What if the power line falls in front of the house? There's so many of these scenarios, but if you follow the certain criteria I gave you, and you have a lot of resources on the internet. The internet, you can find out so much information, and you can encompass all of this. And once again, it's just extremely important that everybody in your household is on the same page and they all understand what needs to happen in a time of need. Thank you, guys. All right, so questions. And once again, James Kelly, and my contact is right there.
Thank you, James. I have a few questions on private chat, which I'm going to read off in a second. Just a reminder for everyone else, if you have a question, go ahead and start typing now, and I will get to it one at a time. And question one has to do with slide number 13, I believe. Let me see if I can find the right one.
Yes.
So, so a question has to do with bullet number 2. Yeah, so what is the best line of defense for against each one of the, I'm assuming, the scenarios that you have here? So can you elaborate more on internet usage and the communications? And in that case, so say if someone is working from home and something happens to their network, what are some backup strategies? If you could elaborate more on that based on what we are discussing.
Yeah, of course. So most people have the ability to create a wireless hotspot on a phone. If your cell provider doesn't support that, I highly recommend enabling that feature. You don't have to use it all the time, but in time of need, especially when your internet connection goes down and you can't access your work or any of your documents that you need to get to, it's important to have that. But also realize that you can contact your ISP, because most of the time, they, on their end, they can refresh your entire coax link. They have a lot of tools in their arsenal to make sure that they can restore your internet. But let's say you don't have the hotspot. You can go drive your car and park in any sort of behind a McDonald's, or because most of the places are going to be closed. Fast food restaurants, they have public Wi-Fi usually, or a library. But just realize that when you're on a public network like that, you need to have a virtual private network. Any other questions?
Yeah, so you kind of cut off at the end, the virtual private network.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah.
So next question, that's also on the same one, and this person is asking, what if my backup plan does not work?
So when you when you're evaluating all sorts of plans that you have, most of the time the plan is never going to go as you write it. So if your backup plan isn't working, it's important to reevaluate. So you need to get everyone around, you need to recollect and kind of honestly have like a brainstorm, because the more minds you have on a certain issue, the more likelihood that you're able to solve it. Because it's really hard to have one person make every single plan. So it's and adapting, so reconstituting. You need to be able to identify the flaws, and maybe your plan just will never work. Maybe you need to think of it in a different perspective. Let's say the plan, you can't prevent this from happening, so let's come up with a solution on how we mitigate it. So we can mitigate the risks and we can make them a lot less severe.
Thanks, James. So next question, what VPNs do you recommend?
All free VPNs, they're not good. They sell your data. They monitor all the connections. They will give up any sort of logs. Personally, I like having a VPN from my house. You can go to any sort of store or on the internet and purchase a Raspberry Pi. The one downside to having a VPN at your house is you need to make sure that your wireless network is secured with WPA2 AES encryption. You need to make it so if there is any, and you also got to think of it as if there's any sort of malicious device on your network, your VPN is basically useless. Some ones that I can think of that you can buy. I've heard of like NordVPN, but I wouldn't recommend them. There's a website, Hide My Ass. That one's really good. But don't trust my judgment. Being a cybersecurity major, you need to take in everybody's input. But at the end of the day, you need to choose it for yourself. You need to do your own research and find out what best suits your needs.
Thank you. So next question, what's the importance of testing periodically? So how often should someone test their plan?
So testing, once again, practicing, testing, same thing. It's super important to be able to run, have like a makeshift drill. I mean, we've been doing it since we were young. Every time in school, we would practice fire drills, lockdowns. A lot of people don't take them serious, but you need to get rid of that mindset in a lot of people, and you need to make them realize that the reason we're training this is because if this situation truly does happen, we need to know where there's vulnerabilities or flaws in the planning. And then you can reevaluate, change the plan to better fit your needs.
Thank you.
Sorry, like just to add to that, a interval, it depends on the overall goal of the plan. So if your plan is for evacuation or a natural disaster, I would say it's safe. Your safest bet is minimum once a week, or I mean minimum once a month, but ideally weekly drills are the best, especially if you're in a high risk area. So there's so many factors that apply to it, but at the end of the day, like, I mean, practice does help a lot.
Awesome, thank you. So next question is going to be on communication. So let's talk a little bit about virtual security.
Mm-hmm.
I think you covered the router earlier. What else
Yep.
should I be doing on my home network other than just default passwords and making sure I have a router that I can control and not my ISP? Do you recommend anything else on top of that?
So when you go into your router settings, make sure that the router's DNS settings are set to either a one that you trust. So I know there's Cloudflare, there's Cloud9, all of that. Because by default, routers will configure to how the ISP wants them. So for example, when I sign on to my Verizon one, I have the Verizon DNS servers. They can monitor all your traffic there. Another way to protect your home network is if you have some children in the house, a guest network is essential. Or if you have a teenager in the house and they have their friends come over a lot, making them sign on to the guest Wi-Fi is way more secure than allowing them onto your normal wireless network.
Thank you. So next question. What is the importance of firewall? Is there anything that you recommend for those that's simple enough for ordinary citizens to deploy?
Yes. So there's a lot of open source firewalls that you can get, and it's just a matter of getting them mounted to mounting the ISO image to a USB drive, finding any sort of computer you have in your closet. So for example, I had an old Dell. I took the open source software pfSense, and I was able to, this is work in progress, but I'm trying to set it up in front of my ISP's router, so it acts as the first layer. But if a firewall isn't, if a hardware-based firewall doesn't fit your needs, you can always install a software-based firewall on your computer and your operating system. One that I highly recommend is Komodo. I was able to get a license key for personal use for like $3.99. Komodo is amazing. It has host-based intrusion detection, and it has a virtualization option. So if you were to potentially open a file that was malicious, it would sandbox it. And sandboxing is just running it in a virtual environment.
All right, thanks, James. So next question, would disabling webcam on your device a good security option?
Yes. So if it's a included webcam on your laptop, I would recommend putting a Band-Aid over it, or just like a little piece of paper with some tape. Because even if you do disable it through the BIOS and in Windows, I'm pretty sure there's a way to still get into it. Same goes for your phone. Personally, I use a wallet case on my phone, so my front-facing camera isn't visible when I have it closed. But just be aware that if you do not want to be watched, then remove any sort of technology that can connect to wireless or is just connected to the internet in general.
Great, and I think I don't see any more questions on the chat. Thank you very much again for your time. I think this was a great presentation. Just a reminder to our audience, this will be posted by the end of tomorrow on ISACA Greater Washington DC's chapter's website. For those that missed it, you can still go back and listen to the presentation. James, on behalf of GWDC and our partners for these virtual series, I would like to thank you. And we do have a present for you. Next time when I see you, I'll make sure that you have that.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thank you, guys. It was a lot of fun.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.